Charlie Chaplin made millions of people laugh. But in 1924, behind the gates of his Beverly Hills mansion, the 35-year-old star entered a marriage that would become one of the darkest chapters of his private life. His bride, Lita Grey, was 16. Within 3 years, they would have 2 sons, barely speak to each other, and enter a divorce battle filled with allegations so damaging that Chaplin's career appeared to be in danger. What made it so bitter wasn't the divorce itself. It was everything that happened before anyone was watching. She met Chaplin long before she became his wife. Lilita Louise McMurray was born in Hollywood in 1908, into a family already circling the edges of the film industry. By her own account, she first encountered Charlie Chaplin as a young child at a Hollywood cafe. At 12 years old, Chaplin cast her as the flirting angel in his 1921 film, The Kid, a small but memorable role in one of the most successful pictures of his career. She appeared briefly again in The Idol class that same year. Her contract was not renewed afterward, and for a few years she largely disappeared from his films. She was 15 when their paths crossed again. Chaplin was casting his next major picture, The Gold Rush, and was testing actresses for the female lead. Lita auditioned and won the role. Chaplin renamed her Lita Grey and began building the production around her. Production began in 1924. Somewhere during filming, a relationship began between the 35-year-old director and his 15-year-old star. The imbalance was total. Chaplin was one of the most powerful men in the film industry. Wealthy, world-famous, in complete control of his own studio and every decision affecting Lita's career. Lita was a teenager whose entire professional future depended on his approval. She was not entering this relationship as anything resembling his equal. She was entering the world of one of the most famous and powerful men in Hollywood, with almost no power of her own inside it. By the time filming was underway, Lita was pregnant. She left The Gold Rush. Actress Georgia Hale was brought in to replace her in the role that had originally been built around her. And when Lita's pregnancy became undeniable, whatever this relationship had been suddenly became something neither of them could hide. Then came a marriage neither seemed ready for. Under California law at the time, Chaplin's relationship with a girl Lita's age carried the possibility of a statutory charge. According to Lita's later account, her family, particularly her grandfather, confronted Chaplin once the pregnancy became known and pressured him toward marriage rather than risk the legal consequences. Chaplin, she recalled, was reluctant. Whatever combination of pressure and calculation led to it, the outcome was swift. On November 26, 1924, Charlie Chaplin and Lita Grey were married in a quiet ceremony in Empalme, Mexico, far from the press that would have descended on Los Angeles. He was 35. She was 16. The wedding took place quietly in Mexico, far from the Hollywood press that surrounded Chaplin's every move. In a matter of months, Lita had gone from being a teenage actress preparing for the biggest role of her young career to becoming the secret wife of a 35-year-old superstar and, soon afterward, a mother. The Hollywood career that had seemed to be opening in front of her had effectively disappeared. Charles Chaplin Jr. was born in May 1925. Sidney Earl Chaplin followed in March 1926. A pregnancy had turned a secret relationship into a marriage, but marriage did not turn it into a happy one. Inside the mansion, Lita said she was alone. Publicly, Lita Grey was now the wife of the most famous entertainer alive, living inside a Beverly Hills mansion most people could only imagine. Privately, by her own later account, she was a teenage mother spending long nights waiting for a husband who rarely came home. Chaplin's work consumed him almost entirely. He was in the middle of one of the most demanding creative periods of his career, and by Lita's telling, he treated the marriage as an obligation that competed with, and consistently lost to, everything else in his professional life. She described him in her memoirs as brilliant, but also as difficult to reach emotionally, insecure beneath the public confidence, and prone to withdrawing from her and from their children, rather than engaging with the reality of the family he now had. A teenage mother and a husband, nearly twice her age, a man who had built his entire adult identity around controlling his work and his surroundings, were now living radically unequal lives inside the same house. This was not simply a marriage that had gone wrong. It was two people who had never been equals to begin with, now trapped inside a domestic arrangement neither of them had genuinely chosen. And eventually, Lita stopped waiting for the marriage to improve. Then Lita walked out. In November 1926, according to Lita's own account, she discovered that Chaplin was having an affair with Myrna Kennedy, an actress Lita herself had introduced into Chaplin's circle and encouraged him to cast. Whatever remained of the marriage effectively ended that month. Lita took their 2 sons and left. In January 1927, she formally filed for divorce. Her complaint ran 52 pages, an extraordinary, sensational document by the standards of the era. Lita alleged cruel and inhumane treatment. She alleged that Chaplin had pressured her to obtain an illegal abortion earlier in the pregnancy. She alleged repeated infidelity and described specific behavior within the marriage that she characterized as forced and unwanted. They were extraordinary allegations, made under oath, but they remained Lita's allegations, not findings established by a court. Chaplin fought back through his lawyers, denying the most damaging characterizations. But the complaint had already done its work. Newspapers seized on every detail. The scandal dominated headlines for months, transforming what had been a private collapse into one of the most publicly consumed celebrity divorces of the era. What had begun behind closed doors was about to become everybody's business. The divorce nearly destroyed Chaplin. On January 11, 1927, a court froze Chaplin's entire estate, reported at roughly $16 million, at the request of Lita's legal team, pending resolution of the case. Chaplin was, quite literally, cut off from his own fortune while the divorce proceeded. The timing could not have been worse professionally. He was in production on the circus, and the scandal forced repeated interruptions to filming as the legal battle consumed his attention and threatened his finances simultaneously. Contemporaries described him as approaching a nervous breakdown under the combined weight of the legal exposure, the press coverage, and the personal collapse playing out in public view. There were even calls, amid the sensational coverage, for his films to be boycotted or banned outright. The case was ultimately resolved with a settlement reported at $825,000, $625,000 to Lita directly, and $200,000 placed in trust for their 2 sons. It was, at the time, the largest divorce settlement ever recorded in the United States. Part of what pushed Chaplin toward settling, according to accounts from the period, was Lita's reported threat to name several other prominent women with whom he had allegedly been involved during the marriage, an escalation neither side wanted to see play out fully in open court. The marriage had lasted less than 3 years. Its destruction followed both of them for decades. Their sons paid a price too. The scandal did not end when the settlement was signed. Charles Jr. and Sidney grew up at the center of a custody arrangement, shaped entirely by the bitterness of their parents' divorce. Shuttled between boarding schools, spending limited and often carefully managed time with a father whose fame made ordinary visitation nearly impossible. Years after the divorce was finalized, Charlie and Lita were still fighting in court over their sons' futures. In 1932, Chaplin formally opposed putting the boys into films, a position Lita disputed, arguing publicly that he had gone extended periods without seeing or communicating with either son at all, making his objections about their careers difficult to reconcile with his actual involvement in their lives. The two boys responded to that fractured childhood in strikingly different ways. Charles Jr. spent years visibly seeking his father's approval, appearing in a small role in Chaplin's limelight decades later, publishing a memoir about his father that was more generous than the childhood he had actually described within it, and struggling for the rest of his relatively short life with the shadow of a name he could never quite live up to. Sidney, several years later, arrived at something closer to peace with it, building a genuine Broadway career on his own terms, and telling an interviewer in 1967 that he considered it a bore to blame a difficult adult life on a famous father. Same parents, same collapsed marriage, two very different inheritances. Years later, Lita saw Charlie differently. Lita Grey lived until 1995, outliving Charlie Chaplin by nearly 2 decades and outliving every other wife he ever had. After the divorce, she built a career of her own on the vaudeville and nightclub circuit, touring for years before eventually stepping back from performing. She married 3 more times. She adopted a son in 1940. Financial difficulty followed her at points despite the size of her settlement, and she spent stretches of her later years working ordinary jobs to support herself. She also spent decades writing and talking about her marriage to Chaplin, publishing a memoir in 1966, and working on a second, more reflective account that was ultimately published after her death in 1998. That later memoir, compiled from decades of reflection, has been described by those who read it as notably less bitter than her earlier public statements. An account that examined the marriage almost objectively, acknowledging Chaplin's genuine brilliance and the damage of his own impoverished, chaotic childhood without erasing what he had done to her. Chaplin, for his part, almost never discussed the marriage publicly again. In his own 1964 autobiography, he devoted only a single line to it, that they had 2 sons he was very fond of, that they had tried for 2 years to make the marriage work, and that it ended in a great deal of bitterness. He offered nothing further. Time didn't rewrite their marriage, but it changed the way Lita understood the man she had married. What their marriage left behind. Charlie Chaplin survived the scandal. His career survived it too. The circus was completed, released to strong reviews, and earned him a special award at the first-ever Academy Awards ceremony the following year. He eventually found the lasting, stable marriage his earlier relationships had never given him, spending the final decades of his life with Una O'Neill in Switzerland. Lita survived as well, rebuilding a career, raising her sons, marrying again, and living to 87, long enough to look back on the marriage with more complexity than the sensational headlines of 1927 ever allowed for. But what happened between them became something neither of them completely escaped, especially because 2 sons grew up carrying the consequences of a relationship that began with an enormous imbalance of power and ended in one of the most publicly devastating divorces Hollywood had ever seen. The cruelest part of Charlie Chaplin and Lita Grey's marriage may not have been how spectacularly it ended. It was how young Lita was when it began, and how long both families lived with what came afterward. Do you think Lita Grey's later, more reflective view of Chaplin changes how you see their marriage? Or does it not matter, given how the relationship began? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. If you enjoy documentaries that uncover the hidden moments behind history's biggest names, please like and subscribe so you never miss another one.